get started. Yeah, another welcome from us. I have to click on the recording. My name is Julia Nitschke. I am VP Digital and Consulting at iSquare and work very closely with our UX team. And with me is my colleague Martina. Do you want to introduce yourself, Martina?
Yeah, hi, also welcome from my side. I'm Martina, also part of the UX team. I'm a principal research consultant here and also conducting together with our clients all kinds of UX research projects. So we work very closely with each other, and so do also several other consultants in our team. And yeah, I'm happy to host this class with Julia together.
Yeah, we will share the content a bit between us. Yeah, as Michael mentioned, our CEO in the very beginning, it's the first time we do this format, the master classes. And I hope a lot that it's going to be a bit interactive, so not so much like a lecture, but feel free anytime to just unmute yourself if you have comments or questions. As I have the presentation on full screen mode, I don't see all of you, so I might not notice in case you raise a hand, right? So just don't be shy and talk anytime if you want to share a thought with us. We will take about an hour now on the topic of UX tests. And first of all, I wanted to briefly introduce iSquare and UX research at iSquare to you. Then Martina is going to share some basic knowledge on UX tests with you. Then we have prepared some typical do's and don'ts and pitfalls you should avoid if you want to conduct UX testings. And then we have two more specific topics. That's remote setups for UX tests. Actually, since the pandemic started, we do most of our UX tests remotely. So we thought that's also an interesting aspect, and how UX tests can fit into agile development, agile setups. Yeah. Then I would say we start. There seems to be one more person in the waiting room, but yeah, I think we are good to go now. It's 5 past already. Yeah, briefly, an introduction to iSquare, as not all of you may know us. We're a market research company, more than 20 years old already, founded in 1999 by Michael, who you already got to know in the very beginning. We do all kinds of market and user research, and we are divided mainly in 3 units. We are representing the user experience research unit, Martina and me, and there's 8 more colleagues. We also do brand and media research. They most of all take care about testing of advertisements, pre-testing, also shopper experience. But as today UX tests are our topic, it's of course hosted by us, the user experience unit. We have offices in 6 countries, but our headquarters, the biggest and main office, is here in Berlin. You can see part of our office, the Kunsthalle, where Michael is sitting. We are over 80 colleagues, and most of us are actually based in the headquarters in Berlin. We work for more than 300 clients worldwide. Just to give you a little impression, it's really basically all industries you can think of, right? We have automotive, the big internet companies, insurances, banking, like really anything you can think of. And that's one of the advantages working for a service provider. You really get to know all trends in all industries, always up to date. Maybe one more thing to mention, not sure if you're familiar with the distinction between explicit and implicit, but I think one thing that makes us maybe a bit special is that we always try to keep in mind that we don't just stick to the explicit. That's basically what users can tell us in interviews or surveys using words and cognition. We always try to also find out about the implicit, for example, emotions, what they feel, and also perception as a precondition, right? So, for example, in a UX test, if something is not understood, it's interesting to know, right? Do they not understand because they haven't detected and seen and perceived something, or have they read it but nevertheless not understood, right? So whenever it's possible, we try to take all those aspects into account. And then today we are focusing on UX tests, but of course in our user experience research unit, we do the whole spectrum of UX research you can imagine, right? We also do quantitative studies, online surveys, for example. We have a benchmarking product that makes it very easy to compare the UX of your product to the competition. Sometimes it gets very qualitative and it's more in-depth interviews if our clients want to understand their target groups and their needs. We have specific solutions for pharma and healthcare research, for automotive research. But yeah, today we will focus totally on UX tests. And that's, by the way, still the method we most frequently use. That hasn't really changed over the years. And it makes sense because it's really the most elegant way to find out how well your product works, be it a prototype or an app or a website. And now, first of all, Martina is going to give some basic facts and overview on UX tests.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Julia. Okay, it works. So yes, I want to dive more deeply into the basics of the UX test. But before I do that, I just want to quickly ask you, who of you has already made some experiences with doing UX tests, be it in the own company or just anywhere? Maybe you can just yeah, unmute and just say it or give a little hand sign. Does anyone? Okay, so it seems not to be the case, but then, yeah, glad. Okay, there's one person I see. But feel free also throughout the class to also share your experiences. I think it will also be very valuable for all others here today. So as Julia mentioned, we're going to focus on UX tests, and it's quite a classic approach in user experience research, and it's still the most used methods that we do. I would say around 80% perhaps. And basically the goal of a UX test is to better understand the user in interacting with the product. So in the UX test, the target group conducts relevant, often task-based scenarios on an app, for example, or website or software, and thereby using the relevant use case, for example, buying a product until the checkout. And thereby observers and clients can watch live how users actually get along with their site, the users of their target group. So UX test is typically conducted, for example, when a company wants to improve the user flow or even implement a very new feature. So the aim could be that, the UX test should test for a pain point of the existing site, for example, this existing online shop in the current flow, or there might be already a new prototype which is to be tested in order to avoid developing it in a totally different direction and with a lot of costs that come with it. So UX testing is relevant at very different points in the product development process. And ultimately, by conducting UX tests, you want to use this knowledge in order to improve the product. So you want clear insights on UX issues and hands-on recommendations on what to improve, where we support our clients in order to do that. UX test is usually a one-on-one session between the participant and the moderator. And we at iSquare, I would say most of the time, it's a standard of 16 minutes duration, 60 minutes duration. And it offers enough time to conduct several scenarios and test the product, but also to fit in a pre-interview and a little post-interview to go also a little bit beyond just testing the interaction on the product. And of course, it depends also on the scope of the research and the complexity of the product. So sometimes 30 minutes can be enough. Sometimes it needs to be a little bit longer, but we would recommend not to make a session longer than 90 minutes unless you have a break in between, but that should be kind of the limit. To do a UX test, you should test it at least with 6 users. Like more users are recommended when you want to test, for example, different target groups, like non-users versus users of the product, or competitor users, or you have different versions of a product you want to test against each other, or compared with the competitor side. So it's often when we do UX tests, and what we recommend is between 6 and 20 participants. UX tests can be conducted in the lab. We have a lab in Berlin at iSquare, but we are also able to just book external facilities in other cities in Germany or even in other countries. But since Corona came along, we greatly shifted our UX testing to remote settings via Zoom most often. And that works actually quite well still for us. So we were also in the beginning a little bit surprised how well that actually works. The big advantage, of course, is doing in-lab studies is eye tracking, which gives valuable additional insights on the visual attention, where the participant is looking in real time. So by measuring eye tracking, our clients and the observers can really follow where the person looked at, what grabs their attention, which features might be overlooked. And we cannot really do this remotely at the moment. It's not very accurate, but hopefully in the future we might be able to do that in a better way. Regarding results, we are having prioritized UX issues in the end that we provide to our clients with hands-on recommendations for improvement. So we consider, regarding the UX issues, to how many participants did that even occur, but also the severity is important to consider, and how severe is that problem really, and how far does it prevent the user to reach this goal, and how far does it in the end also impact the business goals, of course. And despite that a UX test is a rather qualitative approach and you have 6 to 20 users, usually we still like to do, and we recommend to still add some quantitative UX ratings. For example, after the participants have tested a product in the UX test, we use our standardized system acceptance questionnaire. These are a little short online questionnaire asking about dimensions on the perceived usability, for example, or the understandability or trustworthiness of the product. So over the years, for each UX tests that we have conducted, we have asked this questionnaire, and we built up a benchmark for separate industries, and then we compare it against each other, and then you can see how your product fares against the benchmark of the same industry. Okay, feel free to ask questions also just in between, otherwise
But actually, we will come back to all of those topics, right?
Yeah. Just if something is not clear, or maybe somebody has a question, just feel free to ask in between. Okay. So does that? Okay, it works. Now I want to dive deeper into the different steps, how we plan and prepare UX tests at iSquare with our client, and in cooperation with our client. But what would you say before even doing the UX interviews? What needs to get done before? What are the first steps, or what is the first step in your opinion?
Does anybody
Anyone
have an idea?
So finding the perfect people to get tested, somebody wrote in the chat. Also, thanks for sharing your background and interest a bit. Identifying what you want to test is a good point. And test objectives.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, that's very good and very much in line what we are having here. Yeah, one of the very most urgent first steps is understanding actually the objectives, so that we are really in line with all stakeholders and clients on what is actually expected as an outcome. And in order to be able to develop the idea of the test design, so we are able to actually answer the client's questions. So is there a certain challenge, a certain hypothesis that is to verify or falsify? What are the research questions? Is it about finding out which prototypes works better if there are different versions? Or is it about finding out which frictions are there in the checkout process, or how our product fares against the main competitor? All these is important to align on right at the beginning. And also if there are some unrealistic expectations of clients, to advise, okay, what is actually doable? For example, if you know you have 1 hour for a UX test per person, what is actually doable and what makes the most sense? And also it's very important to actually define what is the relevant target group for the test. Is it only the users or non-users, and what different demographics or other criteria play a role, such as your job profile or the experience with certain sites and activities. So based on these information on the target group we aligned on, we will then prepare a recruitment screener, which is a questionnaire where we really ask concrete questions to find out if the person fits into the target group or not. And by doing so, it's very important to ask open-ended questions or give enough answering alternative instead of just asking yes or no questions. For example, you wouldn't ask.
We come back to that with the do's and don'ts. So.
Okay, so I don't. So Julia will give you some examples later on.
Don't spoiler.
I will not spoil, okay. So then you have clear, cutoffs when a person is in or not. And recruitment usually takes 1 week or 2 weeks, depending on the complexity. And we also check the recruiting updates that we get if the participants really fit into the target group as we have defined it in the recruitment screener. Okay, so another important step is then, of course, preparing the actual interview guideline, where it is important to give a good instruction on what is going to happen in the test and why, and also to make the participant feel comfortable, so the person knows what's expected of him. And what we recommend is also to allow enough time for a pre-interview to learn about the participants' backgrounds and needs, because then you are able to also learn about what is the past behavior or what are the current preferences. You might learn something about why the person likes the competitor and what is the needs and expectations before even showing the actual interaction, the interactive product that you want to test. So it's very valuable to go beyond the actual product to test and get more insights around that. Throughout the interview, always make sure that you give participants enough guidance and explanations so they know what you expect from them. And also, if you work with task scenarios, to make them really clear and make sure the participants have understood what is expected of them. And whenever possible, it's also important to try to find scenarios that are actually relevant to the participants so that they can really immerse into the situation and the situation becomes as realistic as it can be in a test session. For example, imagine you want to buy a new laptop and then you will observe how they're actually going to do this on your site. A further important step which we of course plan always in front and parallel to the other steps, but to make sure you have the internal sources reserved. So for example, if there are external moderators, these need to be briefed, and make sure the technical setup is all prepared. If it's a Zoom meeting that has to be set up, or in the lab, and you need certain stimuli or prototypes that you need to download. So this is all important to keep in mind, and checking the last recruitment update and the schedule to make sure you have recruited the correct participant, the suitable participants. And what we also recommend to do, and do this with every study, is prepare a note-taking sheet. So it's easier in the end to evaluate also what has happened in the UX test. And it's always good to plan with the pilot. So after the first interview, maybe it's not going always as smooth, but then you can really see, okay, how well does it fit within the hour? And are there things we need to prioritize in a different way? So we have a debrief session with our clients in order to see if there would be a need for adaptation of the study flow and perhaps the guideline. Okay, then does this go to the next slide? Now it works, thanks. Great, let's say we have thought of all the 4 steps and we are ready to go for actually doing our UX test. What would you say when doing the UX test? What is really the core of conducting the UX test to get the really most valuable insights possible out of it?
Okay, then we'll just give the participants a bit of time. So asking and getting feedback here takes a little bit more time. You can
we are now
and speak, or you can write in the chat. Maybe you can repeat the question, Martina.
Yeah, what do you think? What is the core of UX tests when conducting them? So we have prepared everything, but now we want to conduct the UX test, and we are in the interview. What is really important in order to get the most valuable insights out of it? What should be considered?
Giving a task with all kind of clarity, maybe.
That's of course also very important, to really be clear on the task. Anything else?
Maybe not giving any specific clue to the participant, and just find out what the workflows are.
I actually saw, that's also very important. Everything I saw in the chat, somebody wrote observation. This is actually, one of the very most important pieces. So it's actually observing the user behavior, and not only to listening what they say afterwards. Like when they say it was easy, and you then conclude, oh, it works just well, then you miss out on important things that you get when you actually observe the behavior. So we recommend to, at first, just let the participants do work on a scenario or interact with the site as they would do, and not interrupt them too much, not asking them too many questions. You will have time for it afterwards in this, what we call guided flow. So you will then ask questions and go back through it, and based on your observation notes that you did. And speaking of observation notes, that's also really important, to prepare a sheet and to think through, okay, what is the objective of the study? And and this makes it easier to evaluate when you write down, okay, which path was chosen, which issues occurred, and for how many people did this issue occur? And was it maybe more prevalent in a certain user group? Was it more prevalent in the non-users versus the users? So having a good note-taking sheet, or of course also different ways of note-taking are possible, whatever suits to you, but that makes the evaluation easier in the end.
I can only actually very much agree. So if you say you could only do either an interview or observing the behavior, we would always choose the observation of the behavior, right? So that's really the heart of the UX test. And it's also really important for the clients, right? Usually they don't really see how real users use their site. Very often that's really eye-opening, right? So, yeah. I think then I will continue, Martina.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, as we were thinking of what's most crucial and important about the UX test itself, of course, the next important question is what skills do you need as an UX expert, right, to get most out of the test you do? And actually, the first thing that came up to my mind was empathy, because watching what the users do is the one thing, but you have to understand why, right? And the more empathic you are, the better your understanding will be, right? So maybe you are able to see, oh, here they are hesitant or struggling, or obviously don't really know what they should do. But yeah, to have an understanding of what's going on there and why, I think that's really very, very important as a good UX expert. And it also helps you to know at what point should I give some help, or even say, okay, that's fine, we can stop it here. Or you realize, hey, they simply forgot what they were supposed to do, so it might help to remind them, right? But the more empathic you are, the better your interview and your UX test will be. And then the second step, of course, that's kind of the magic and the art after observing what's going on, is, of course, the interpretation, right? So that kind of leads from what you observe to the actual results of your test. And as Martina mentioned before, that always goes beyond what users said, right? It's really very typical. You can tell that all 8 participants were really struggling, but half of them say in the end, oh, that was easy, right? And then you can't write into the report, it was easy, right? You have to rely on your interpretation of what you actually saw. And of course, it's your task to answer what of those issues were actually caused by the app, the site, the prototype. Was it due to a bad wording or design issues, right? And also this, the whole site, prototype, app, is it really in line with what users expect and want and need, right? So yeah, and then the next, it's kind of very closely linked to the interpretation. That's, of course, being able to really evaluate the product. So evaluation kind of relates the insights and your interpretation to an assessment of the tested site or app, right? So then it's really about giving the client or your colleagues, in case it's internal, feedback on the site and on the apps, right? So really saying, this flow worked very well. Here was an issue with wordings. Here things were not detected. So really an assessment of the UX design and content. Yeah. So from my quite few years in the UX area, I would say those are the things that are really, really important. And when we try to find new colleagues, we already try to assess if they are able to have those skills. Of course, you can learn it, right? But if you're not empathic at all, I think it will be tough to become a very good UX research consultant. Then, of course, really, really important, the desired outcome, right? You have observed, you have interpreted, of course, you also have interviewed, but what the clients want in the end is a good and clear and concise report, right? So we want clear answers on the objectives, on the research objectives and questions the clients had. And really hands-on recommendations. And I think toughest to write in the beginning for new colleagues is always the management summary. That's meant to really be, if possible, a one-pager, maximum 2. And that really sums up very briefly the main findings. And that's really, in the beginning, it's more, it's easier to write more than trying to bring it to the point, really. And next to the management summary, of course, the recommendations, clear recommendations. And what we always do is also then go through the flow in the report step by step and show what UX issues occurred at what step. It's best actually with showing it on a screen, on a screenshot. And there you have a bit more room, right? Where you can then explain, right? This wording was not understood and so on. And the length, that's very different, right? Sometimes it's enough to have like the summary, the recommendations, and maybe 3-4 slides with the details. In some cases, when you have complex versions and have to compare a lot of, or maybe also desktop and mobile, sometimes it can be even 50 slides, but often that's not necessary, actually. Then we collected some typical pitfalls, especially for beginners very often. And that's why I stopped you before, Martina, here, because
sure.
I mentioned the screener again. So one rule, and something that in tendency happens with new colleagues sometimes, if you go through the screener with a potential participant and somebody who always answers yes will be screened in, then you have a problem with your screener, right? So that's what Martina also meant with it's important to ask open question or give a lot of alternative answers, right? So a bad example, if you want to screen or if you look for nurses in your screener, it shouldn't say, are you a nurse? It should be, what's your job profession, right? And then either ask it as an open-ended question or you have a long list of all different kinds of job roles. And then for the colleagues or the provider who does the recruiting, it's always important that for every alternative, you always have clear screen in, screen out, screen in, screen out, so that it's really totally clear that who's in the end really fits the target group. Somebody is not muted. Okay. Then with the guideline, it's a bit similar. Very often, even if you don't want it to happen, you are kind of led by the objectives, the research objectives, right? Maybe even by a hypothesis, the new prototype should be better than the current version of the site. And it's not only the questions you ask that might be impacted by that. Sometimes it's even the tasks, right? You have to make sure if you test 2 different versions that it's not like easier to solve with one version than with the other. Or sometimes, I don't know, you say with the current site, it's also including a complicated registration flow, and then with the prototype not. And that's why then users like the prototype better, because it was just easier, right? So you have to make sure that it's really fair and you're open for any result, basically. And it's really important also to give each other feedback between our colleagues and try to monitor yourself that you really ask questions openly, right? It can be enough the tone of voice, how you ask to influence how participants react. So for example, if you say after a task, so was this easy for you? Right, then they tend to say yes, right? But that's not really what you want to get, right? Or if you tested 2 versions and then you say, did you like this one better? Right? Questions can be very directive, even if when reading them, they might sound neutral or okay, but you have to really be careful there. So a better example would be to really just say, please sum up in your own words. What did you like about it? What did you not like so much, right? And really have them set the order and what they consider most important. And then during the fielding, in the interviews and in the tests, Martina also, Martina also mentioned it before, this balance between giving enough instruction and guidance, but not to influence them, right? That's really also very, very important. So it's totally okay to be directive and give guidance so that they understand what you expect from them, what they are supposed to do in the scenarios, right? And also to remind them in between. But on the other hand, of course, you don't want to guide them to the solution, right? And this differentiation, where is it good to give guidance and where should you step back? That's really important. And I would say our main learning is that giving enough and can be extensive guidance and explanations before they start, so like instructions. But then once they started, then you should really step back and let them just do whatever they would do also if they were alone, right? And we also think it's best to not ask too many questions, but rather let them really do it by themselves. Because even a question like, why do you click here, right, can already indicate that this was obviously wrong, right? And then they do something else. So it's really better to let them do, wait until they finished, or you realize they struggle so much that they need help, right? Then it's also okay to help them. But apart from that, it's really better to first step back, and then you can go through the flow with them together once more. And then you can say, hey, here I noticed first you wanted to try here, and then could you tell me what you were thinking, right? But then you are much closer to a natural user behavior. So what you don't want to have is that they take 15 minutes for a scenario because 10 of the 15 minutes were talking, right? You want to get an idea if they really can go through the flow easily or if they struggle. And with too much interview and thinking aloud, it's really hard to tell in the end. And then the last thing, this could be a whole lecture by itself, of course, but on results and reporting, what happens to newer colleagues frequently is that the reports are much too descriptive. So the result slides then just keep on saying, here with this scenario, 5 out of 10 participants did this, 3 out of 10 participants did that, 2 of the other 2 didn't know what to do, right? And then the whole report is full of those numbers and just describing what happened, right? But of course, it's our task as UX experts to actually interpret and evaluate, right? What the client wants to read is what has the prototype solved good and what needs to be improved. So better would be to say the prototype doesn't give enough guidance at this point, right? Users were hesitant or unsure how to solve this scenario, and this was caused by, right? So, yeah. And then some typical pitfalls regarding recommendations. The first is actually you shouldn't be too shy, right? And it's your job to give guidance and directions and recommendations as a UX expert. sometimes that's not easy and might feel a bit strange, but it's part of the job, right? To give recommendations and tell clients or colleagues what they should do. It's, yeah, you have to kind of overcome the shyness and do so. And the recommendations themselves, they have to be really clear, right? And offer a better solution. So it's not enough to say this should be changed, right? Then how should it be changed, right? That has to be answered. So a bad example would be, you could maybe think about making it easier, right? That doesn't really help. You have to say, this wording caused misunderstandings. That wording would make it clearer, right? So change it. And then the other thing, we mentioned that before already, the recommendation should really be based on your observations and your expert view and opinion, right? It's not enough to just reproduce what the user said in the interviews. As I mentioned, sometimes they say something was easy, even though you could tell it wasn't easy at all, right? They struggled a lot. Or sometimes they express they don't like advertisements or scrolling, but you could tell, hey, it didn't impact the flow at all, right? They were able to easily go through it. So a bad example would be just to state, hey, 8 out of 10 said they didn't like this or that. Your interpretation could then be, hey, even though participants complained about this or that, they were able to solve this without issues. Or the other way around, right? So when they say it was easy, you could still say, hey, these were the issues that should be optimized. And the last thing is more on the content of the recommendation. I called it bigger is not necessarily better. If you realize that users did not notice something, you might be tempted to say it should be bigger, more colorful, more salient, right? But that's actually not always better. So what's important is that the information is where the focus of attention is at the moment where it's needed, right? And I brought one example, the little screen below. It's actually from a recently conducted test, and it was not for Vodafone. You cannot tell for which client it was by the screen. But actually it was about contracts for smartphone contracts. And here in this case, actually participants did not notice that this example, for example, was for Vodafone, because their attention was focused on the contract details below, and because something so bright and colorful and big was placed above, probably it was taken for an advertisement, but they actually missed the information and even said so, but how can I tell for which of the providers this one is, right? So yeah. Of course, we have a lot of those learnings. We just picked a few, otherwise we would take much more time or even a day or more. But maybe these results were already a bit helpful. Mm-hmm. Before we move on to remote setups, do you have any thoughts or other insights or learnings to share or questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting to hear that you mentioned that, you know, bringing numbers is not a good thing. But when you report back to the business, I kind of find they are curious to know about the numbers, you know. And it's not like, I'm not saying like, you know, it should be full of numbers, but they just would like to know, oh, okay, so how many participants? So how would you manage that?
Yeah. No, you are absolutely right. And I didn't want to say that you shouldn't have numbers, but you have to interpret it. What I wanted to say was, it's not enough to just say 5 out of 10 did this, 3 out of 10 did this, without your interpretation, right? What you could do is saying, hey, here we had a problem with guidance, right? The user flow is not clear enough. And then in brackets, you can say 5 out of 10 were not able to solve this, right? So it's always good to give an indication, but not without saying what the issue was, right? Because can we agree on that?
Yeah, of course. No, that makes sense. Yeah, because I was confused. I thought you were saying that we shouldn't use numbers at all.
No. That's but then I have to make sure that I change it on the slide. That was not supposed to be the message. But thanks a lot for the question.
Maybe Nora wants to ask a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry, my video is not working. I tried it like 10 minutes now, but it just doesn't work. It's on, but it doesn't work. Sorry about that.
But we can hear you.
That's great. Anyway, yeah. So I work for an incubator, and the startups have to do lots of UX testings, or they just want to do it. But I always have the feeling that they get a lot of feedback about the actual idea. So is this happening with you a lot, that people, instead of just testing, are like evaluating already the product or the process or something like that? Yeah. And how do you react on that? Like, how can you bring the people back to the actual task?
Yeah, actually, I think it's very valuable if they go beyond what they tested, right? So we are keen on getting those comments, but we try to do that in the beginning and after. And usually that works quite well. So we ask them in the beginning, if you think of sharing e-scooters or whatever, right? Buying a ticket or booking something. What's important to you? Which providers do you use? What do you like about them? Are you missing something, right? So they have enough space to tell us what's important to them before. Then we clearly say, now let's focus on this example, right? This solution. And we already say that we will evaluate it together in the end. And then we have a post-interview where we again say, apart from how easy it was, what do you think of it in general? Does it fit your needs? Do you think it's better than other solutions, right? So they really have enough room to tell us all this. And then it doesn't happen so much during the scenarios, I would say. Okay. Or Martina, what would you say?
Yeah, I would agree to what you have said.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Very welcome.
Okay. Oh, there's one more question, or Julia, is it a hand sign?
if we have time, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the really nice presentation. I imagine like this observing the user goes into this implicit model you showed us in the beginning, right? I was wondering what other methods we have to actually not ask participants what they're doing and what they think, but just to observe, you know?
I mean, actually, we try to get to those implicit things by observing. If we do the tests in the lab, of course, we have eye tracking, and that actually helps a lot, even if you don't do a detailed analysis, but you see the dot, right? So this, what is he thinking about now, is much easier to tell, right? If you can see, oh, he's reading and he's reading again and again and again. Obviously, he doesn't understand the text, right? So it helps the observation and interpreting what's going on. But we noticed that you get a lot just by really, really carefully observing, right? Because unfortunately, now that we have moved most of the tests to remote setups, which will be the next section, most eye tracking solutions are not accurate enough for our purposes yet. So we do it mostly without now, or if we think eye tracking is really important, then we do it in the lab, right? And apart from that, you could also do like emotion measurement with FET, but often if it's a small UX test, right, it's not really necessary because yeah, our interviewers need to be really good at realizing and being empathic, as I said, right? So are they frustrated now or not? I don't necessarily need an FET to tell, right? But these are options, of course. Also arousal if something gets really stressful. But for a typical small UX test you do within a week, you can cope without. But you have to try to get it with your own sensors as the interviewer. Okay. As we only have some minutes left, I would say maybe 3 minutes for remote setups and another 3 then for agile setups.
Yeah,
There's also 2 questions. Maybe we can collect the questions also for the end. One is accessibility.
We can have 5 more minutes in the end.
Perfect.
Yeah, I will keep it brief because I touched upon remote testing at the beginning already a little bit. So nowadays we do this most of the time over lab UX testings, which works quite well for us. Of course, the disadvantage is not to have eye tracking. But just to give you an overview on how that works. So we usually use Zoom for the remote interviews, and participants will receive then the link and the invitation and login data. And in a similar way, you can, as we do now, do screen sharing, and then you can actually also see, be it on desktop and it's also possible on mobile, how the user is interacting with the website or the app, and you see in the camera and via the microphone what they say. And the clients can also then watch all the sessions in a live stream, but we set it up in a different platform because, as you can imagine, now we are here like a lot of persons in the same room, Zoom room. So it will be distracting for the participants. So we have a separate live stream. So it's only very few people in the same meeting. And of course, there you can use other collaboration tools to make your notes, as you can see on the screenshot. I think it's mural board. And then you can collect your finding in a shared document as well. The big advantage is, of course, that it has made recruitment a lot easier because participants are not needing to go to the lab in Berlin, for example, and you can recruit from anywhere in Germany or so within other countries. Also, it led to fewer no-shows in our experience because they don't have to go anywhere. And obviously COVID-related risks have been eliminated. And we still stick to a lot of remote interviews testing since the pandemic.
That's really interesting. When it started and we had to shift everything to remote, we were a bit scared because before remote tests were really the exception and not the rule or the standard. And now it is possible to go back to the lab, right? And has been during the last year, most of the time even. But neither the clients nor us, unless there's a good reason, right? If it's a physical prototype, of course, you can't really do that remotely, right? Or if for security reason, the prototype shouldn't be on the internet, but only on our appliances, then there's reasons to go to the lab. But apart from that, it works so well remotely that nobody really wants or needs to go back to the lab. Then maybe one last extra topic, because that's also a trend over the last years. More and more of our clients start working agile, especially the product managers and the development teams. So I keep this very short now, hoping that you know a bit about agile development. But in general, most important about agile development is that it always aims to release new features and changes as fast as possible. So not like in the earlier days, a product manager writes 200 pages of requirements and then the development team works on 1,000 changes for 1 year and then you have one huge release. But here the idea is really every change, every feature goes live. If you work with Kanban, you sometimes have 10 releases a day, right? Or with Scrum, then it's maybe once a week. But the idea is to slice it as small as possible and bring it out as soon as it makes sense and is usable for the customers or users. And the aim is that you also get feedback as fast as possible. So it can, of course, be from the live side, and then you see if something goes wrong or not. But if it's something more important, you want to test it before. But because of those short cycles, right, the UX tests have to be conducted and evaluated really fast, right? You can't say you want to be agile and bring out stuff, release stuff as soon as possible, but then you need a 2-week break because of a UX test. It doesn't make sense, right? And I just wanted to share one concept with you that really enables you to fit it in those short cycles. And we actually live this concept with a client. So even if you don't want to do it internally, but with a provider, with a service provider, it works. The concept is called Testing Tuesday. In our case, it's the Wednesday, but that doesn't really matter. The goal is that you have a user test every week, right? Usually there's more than one development team. So you always have one reserved slot and the teams can say, hey, next week we would have something to test. And the week after another team says, and if 1 week none of the teams has something to test, you could always test new ideas or a great solution of a competitor, a new competitor. It's also interesting, right, for the team to learn about that. So you should really stick to this regular slots and always do it. And it can be at the client's office, it can be in our lab, or now remotely, basically. And of course, it shouldn't be too extended, right? It should be maximum 1 day, sometimes even 1 afternoon is enough. So 4, 5, maybe 6 users, shorter slots. And this is possible if you organize recruiting constantly for every week, right? In our example with the client, we realized that this is an issue because if one of the team comes and says, we want to test next week, but it should be all, I don't know, patients with disease ABC, that's not possible so fast, right? So in that case, as we realized, it's mostly the case that they want a more specific target group for the tests. We now ask them to sign up a week earlier so that recruiting can be organized, even if it's more complicated. But the important thing is that, right, test time is usually a day and you don't need an extended report. Either you can have a debrief session together with all the observers and then we just sum it up, right? Main goal is that you really find the main issues, what needs to be changed, and then the team takes that back to their next release cycle, what needs to be improved. And that works really well. So it is possible. That was just one thing I wanted to mention, to fit UX tests into agile settings. And then just one last thought I wanted to share with you as the finish. I'm a big fan of those fast-paced and short cycles and small-size tests because I think the more the better. You can always learn something from it. But one risk is there, and that's that you kind of lose sight of the big pictures, right? For example, how do users perceive the product or even your brand as a whole? Or what about trust? Or have preferences or needs changed over the months? Or is there a new competitor that's much more attractive than you are, right? Things like that. So as a UX researcher, you should always try to cover some of those aspects in the pre and post interview, even if it's just 5 minutes, right? Always ask them, what's your usual behavior in case you want to book a flight or whatever, right? How do you do that? Which providers do you use? What do you like about them? So always try to have an ear on the market situation and user needs in general. And from time to time, if you do those short and very frequent tests, from time to time, you should make sure that you have a bit broader and more general research, like it can be in-depth interviews or an online survey, but that shouldn't be focused on one little feature, but on the user needs in general and the satisfaction with your product. That was one last thing I wanted to share with you. What time is it? Oh, we are already a bit over.
Almost.
Yeah. Okay.
So we had a couple of questions. I guess, I mean, I could just read them one by one. There was also the question of the recording, Julia and Martina. Is that okay to be shared with the participants?
I would say it's best. Can you see our contact data here? If you have more questions we can't clarify now or want to have another look, I think it's best if you just get in touch with us.
Okay, that's good. So the two emails can be seen here. Nitschke, that's Julia, and
Exactly.
Boeck, that's Martina. And the slides, I would say the same. Please contact the
Exactly.
the two of them. And
shall we try maybe to, if you have some more minutes, to come back to some of the questions?
yeah,
at least,
yeah, I'll just read one. Actually, one is actually the accessibility question, and I know you have
that's a big topic.
even a separate team for this. So
Yeah.
I'm actually here. Julia Gurney's here. I can answer the
okay.
question if you'd like. Sorry for not having my camera on. I'm also on the UX team at iSquare. And at CI, I saw your question about accessibility. I guess, as people have mentioned, it's a huge topic. And with something, the question that you asked, I think my first question would be to turn it around for a question for you. So something with accessibility, it's not really like a tool tester, I would say. It's more of like the baseline and the foundation of what you're testing. So your question, I believe, let me just go back up to it, was about a tool for testing images specifically. So this really depends on, are you testing the website or are you testing a screen reader? So images need to be named properly to become accessible. So we call this alt text. So an image, let's say, of a restaurant needs to be aptly named for a user, saying front of restaurant. So this could be the coding of the website. Have the developers coded it properly? Is this the kind of accuracy of a screen reader? So there are like many variables as to what could be tested. So it's not just kind of one tool. It's more of, yeah, it's a really good example of how important it is to get in touch with the user one-on-one, especially with accessibility topics. It's not really something that you can do or harder to do away from the user. It's something that you really need to connect with people personally. That was a bit longer. And I'm also happy to talk to you more about accessibility personally, but there's kind of a lot to unpack
Julia.
there.
I would say, as we are already over time, and accessibility is such a special topic.
Totally.
Yeah, but
happy to chat with you. If you reach out to Julia or Martina, they can give you my information.
Yeah, then I can bring you in touch.
Yeah.
Do we maybe have one more, or does anybody want to share their question? I think
there was one question, but it might go in the same direction. I think it was the same person, was AZ. And so then we'll cover that the next time, the accessibility. And I think
maybe it would be an idea actually for an extra session, right? On accessibility.
Good
But then
point.
thanks a lot to everybody. It was a pleasure. I hope, yeah, it was interesting for you. We are happy to get some feedback. And yeah, did you want to say something, Philip?
No, people just said thanks a lot. It was great, and they learned a lot. So thanks to you, Julia and Martina. And then we wish everybody a great Friday.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day and weekend.